Good morning. My name is Tim Callahan, and I work with Instituto Arvoredo. And today we're here at the Cerrado Vivo exposition. This is the fourth step in the city of Candangolândia in the Federal District of Brazil, in Brasilia. And during these few weeks, we have been talking about the Cerrado, the importance of the Cerrado here in Brazil, as well as the different traditional people groups and communities that have lived in the Cerrado for many generations. And so today I'll be presenting on the exposition, sharing about the importance of the Cerrado, the importance not just for Brazilians, but also for other communities in South America. And so the Cerrado is one of the biomes here in Brazil. I grew up in the United States, and whenever we talked about the Cerrado, whenever we talked about Brazil, we only talked about the Amazon. I am a forester, and so we learned a lot about the environmental effects of deforestation of the Amazon, and the importance of different trees and the biodiversity that's found in the Amazon, but we never talked about the Cerrado. But Brazil is so much more than just the Amazon. It also includes other biomes. And so the Cerrado has this critical importance not only in biodiversity, but also for water security for Brazil as well as South America. And so the Cerrado is one of 6 biomes in Brazil. There is the Amazon, the Cerrado, the Caatinga, the Pampas, the Atlantic forest, as well as the Pantanal. And so the Cerrado sits in the middle of each of these biomes and connects them to one another with these different transition zones. And so today we'll be here, we see the map of the Cerrado of Brazil. And so the Amazon is to the north, the Atlantic forest is to the east, the Caatinga is to the northeast, and the Pantanal is to the west, and the Pampas all the way to the south. And so it has this, it connects each one, and so the plants and the animals live in this area of transition for this in the Cerrado. And so this also helps the Cerrado be incredibly biodiverse. Meaning there's a lot of species of different plants and animals that live in the Cerrado. But the Cerrado is a very old biome. It's more than 40 million years old. And so after many years, the soil has changed. In some ways, it's been degraded because a lot of the nutrients have been lost because of the strong rain and sun impacts that occur here in the Cerrado. There's a wet season and a dry season, and so between about October and April is the summer, and it is the rainy season of the year. And then there's a very dry winter between May and September. And so during this time, there's almost no rain that occurs here in the Cerrado. But in the rainy season, it can pour rain. And so this effect of a lot of rain and then a lot of the dry season affects the nutrients that are in the soil. It washes out all of the nutrients after these 40 million years of the Cerrado. And so historically there have been some megafauna that have lived in the Cerrado, including the giant sloth, the saber-toothed tiger, a giant armadillo, and these fossils have been found here in the Cerrado. There have also been people that have lived in the Cerrado for thousands of years, and so about 11,000 years ago we have records of people that have migrated to the Cerrado and have lived here for these many years that have eventually led to the indigenous people groups that continue to live here in Brazil. So the Cerrado has this nickname or has this characteristic of being an upside-down forest. And that's because a lot of there's a very large presence of roots above or underground, But above ground, the canopy of the trees are typically much smaller. And so a lot of the biomass of the trees is actually underground rather than above ground. So for example, an ipe tree above ground might only be 3 to 5 meters tall, but underground it can be at least 3 times in length. And so underground there might be up to 15 meters of the root system of an ipe tree in the Cerrado. This root system helps water infiltrate down into the soil. It creates space for when the rain comes. The rain can kind of follow the root system down into the underground aquifers. The root systems also help make the soil more porous, so there's more oxygen that can flow down. But these root systems go down so deep that they can reach the water table. And so in the dry season, they're able to utilize that water that is found underground. Even though it hasn't rained for maybe 3 or 4 months, these trees still have access to water. So a lot of the trees here in the Cerrado will flower towards the end of the dry season. So for example, the ipe tree, again, in September, in July, August, and September, that is when they typically flower. And so it may have been 4 months with no rain, and they're able to produce these flowers as they're able to use the water resources that's stored in their roots and also reaching the water table down below to produce these flowers in preparation for the rainy season when they will produce the fruit of the ipe trees. And so with this characteristic of having a smaller canopy and a large root system, it is known as an upside-down forest. This also impacts carbon sequestration because a lot of the carbon is being sequestered in the roots rather than in the leaves and in the canopy, which is more traditional in such as the Amazon or in the United States or in other countries. Typically, the carbon is being stored in those parts of the trees. But in the Cerrado, a lot of the carbon is being stored underground. And so the Cerrado is also a nickname for Brazil's water tower. Here in Brazil, a lot of houses have their own water supply. They have a tank by their houses where the water will go, and then that is the water that will then flow into the sinks and the showers in Brazilian homes. And so this serves as the same purpose. Cerrado serves this purpose for the rest of Brazil. Because the Cerrado is located at a higher altitude, about 1,000 meters in altitude on average, and it sits in the middle, and it's flat. So we're in the high central plateaus of Brazil. And so at this altitude, when the rain falls and the water goes down into the aquifers, into the water table, it is the aquifers store the water, and then they spring up in different parts of the Cerrado. And as they spring up, they will descend into the northeast of Brazil. They'll go to the Amazon, go to the south. And so the Cerrado is acting as this water tower for the rest of Brazil as it receives the water, and then the springs spring up from the ground and disperses the water to other parts of Brazil. And so the roots help with this this process of the water infiltrating, and so it's important for the native vegetation as well to help with the water being able to enter the ground, go into the aquifers, so that then they can then spring up into the natural springs. The Cerrado also has the nickname of being the cradle of waters. And this is because there's more than 131,000 natural springs that are found here in the Cerrado. And so from where I'm standing, there are some natural springs here in the center of Brazil. In Riacho Fundo is a city here in Brasilia, where the water will spring up there. It will go to the Paranoá Lake here in Brasilia, and then eventually it will descend all the way to Uruguay. And so all these springs that are coming up here in the Cerrado will then be dispersed to other parts of Brazil. So this map is showing that the dark green, I'm not sure if you're able to see, but the dark green is where the Cerrado is located. But where the springs come up, it will then go into the river basin of the Amazon. It will go into the river basin of the Rio São Francisco. So this St. Francis, the river. It will go into the Paraná, the river to the south. And so there are 12 different river basins present in Brazil, and 8 of those have their natural springs that are being 8 of those river basins have their headwaters, their natural springs coming from the Cerrado region. And so it's where a lot of the rivers and creeks are being birthed up is here in the Cerrado. So going on to biodiversity and the ecosystem of the Cerrado. The Cerrado is a savanna, and so much of the world knows about the African savanna, whether through the Lion King or the lions and elephants and giraffes. The big 5 that people always talk about is the African savanna. But Brazil has its own savanna, known as the Cerrado. And so, as the Brazilian savanna, it is the most biodiverse savanna in the world. And so while most people think of the African savanna, there are more species present in the Brazilian savanna when compared to the other savannas in the world. There's more than 13,000 plant species that are here in the Cerrado. Many different animals and birds that are native to the Cerrado. And so about 5% of all of the world's species can be found here. And about 30% of the species of Brazil can also be found in the Cerrado. And so the biodiversity of the Cerrado in itself is something that needs to be protected. A lot of the species are grasses, and so people may not think of grass as an important species to conserve, but they play a critical role in the Cerrado region here. So the Cerrado can be broken up into 14 different vegetation cover types. In Portuguese, it's fitophysiognomia. And so of these 14 different vegetation cover types, they can then be divided into 3 different categories. There are forests, there's savanna, and there are fields. And so the forests are where there's about 70% of canopy cover. Savanna is when there's between 5% and 70% canopy cover, and then fields are when there's less than 5% canopy cover, and so that's where a lot of the grasses are growing. And so in these 3 divisions, there is a lot of diversity of the plants growing, a lot of the trees, and so the forests typically grow near the rivers and the creeks. Of this Cerrado, the savanna, these regions grow where the soil is a little bit deeper and maybe a little bit further away from creeks and rivers, but the soil is more nutritious for the trees to grow. And then the fields are usually more shallow soils, and so the roots don't have enough space for the roots to grow. It may also not. It will likely be drier as the water the soil can't hold the water very well. And so these 3 different forms of vegetation can grow in this mosaic of the Cerrado. So in the Cerrado, there's this clear connection between animals, and the plants. And so the animals play a critical importance in the pollination of the plants here, and also the dispersion of the seeds and the fruit of the trees, so that the trees can continue to grow in different areas of the Cerrado. And then, for example, the tapir, the lowland tapir, is the largest mammal here in the Cerrado. And it eats a fruit that is well known here in Brazil called piqui. And so the anta will eat the piqui, and the anta in its stomach, the piqui, it will help break the dormancy of the seeds. So when the tapir is walking around and leaves its droppings, it will help the seeds be ready to grow in different areas in the Cerrado. There's also the red-maned wolf that has a connection with a shrub known as lobera. Lobo guará is the name of the red-maned wolf, and so this plant is named after the red-maned wolf. And so the red-maned wolf will eat this fruit and help disperse its seeds. But the lobera, the fruit, actually also helps the lobo guará, the red-maned wolf, because it helps kill different worms that are in the kidney of the red-maned wolf. And so there's this very clear and important connection between the animals and the trees that grow here in the Cerrado. So as I mentioned, the piqui is a very popular fruit here in Brazil, especially in the Cerrado. About half the people love to eat piqui, and about half the people don't like piqui. But it's a very important fruit in the culture of Brazil. And so this fruit is actually is pollinated by bats. And so bats, there's a big diversity of different bats here in the Cerrado. And so it's actually a bat that will help pollinate the piqui to continue other trees of piqui here in the Cerrado. But in the Cerrado, there's the typical forms of trees, of seeds being dispersed, and different ways of trees and grasses being pollinated. And so they're being pollinated through wind, they're being pollinated through bees. There are many different native species of bees here in the Cerrado that are stingless bees, are the ones that are native here. They're also being pollinated by bats and then also by hummingbirds. And so once they're pollinated and the fruits developed, for the seeds to be dispersed, they're being dispersed by animals, whether it's through digestion and then left through the droppings, or whether it gets stuck on their fur and they walk along and then the seeds fall off. That's one way the seeds are being dispersed. They're being dispersed by wind, and then they're being dispersed by the trees themselves. And so where the seeds are being housed, once it dries, it will break, and then it will act as like a slingshot and be thrown across to disperse the seeds to new areas. So fire is a native part of the Cerrado. It's something that occurs naturally in the Cerrado region. The fire helps burn the grasses to reduce competition for other neighboring plants to be able to grow. And then in addition, fire is used, or fire helps break the dormancy of different seeds. And so as the fire passes over the seeds, it will help kind of wake up the seeds to then be able to grow. But a problem with fire in the Cerrado is that they're happening more frequently and more intensely, and that's due to people starting the fires, whether that's to clear different farmland or to deforest an area and then burn it so that they can use it for cattle raising or for planting large-scale agriculture. And so there's a more more intensity and more frequency among the fires in recent years. And so at the end of, or during the dry season, this is when it happens typically now. But historically, it would happen towards the end of dry season, beginning of rainy season, when the thunderstorms would come through and the lightning would start these fires. But the plants have adapted to tolerate the fires, and so a lot of the trees that are native to the Cerrado will have a thick bark that the fire can burn the outsides of the bark, but not affect the interior of the tree. The grasses may resprout very quickly after the fire passes through. And so if you're in a city and you look at the different tree barks, here in the Cerrado, you can typically identify which is a tree from the Cerrado or which one is not, because if the bark is very smooth, it likely isn't from the Cerrado, or if it is, it's not a fire-adapted species of the Cerrado. It probably would have grown closer to the river, where there's less likely for it to catch on fire. So the Cerrado also has many different plant species that can be used for medicine. So there's over about 13,000 plant species in the Cerrado. About 600 of those species have known uses for remedies for medicine. And so there's the different communities in the Cerrado have this knowledge and understanding of how to use different plants, different seeds, parts of the plants to help with different cures, to help with sore throats, stomach issues. And so there's so much more to even be explored in the Cerrado of how different plants can be used for home remedies. But there's already over 600 species that have been cataloged to have these benefits. So as I mentioned, there are people that have this knowledge of how to use medicinal plants. And so the original people in the Cerrado are the indigenous communities. So in the Cerrado, there's more than 100 different ethnicities or people groups that live in the Cerrado that are indigenous. In Brazil, there's more than 200 languages that are present through the indigenous communities in Brazil. And so they have so much knowledge and understanding of how to live in the Cerrado, how to live in nature, that we have so much to learn from them. As for generations and generations, over 11,000 years, they have been present here in Brazil. And so each of these communities have their own culture, have their own practices, have their own festivals and ceremonies, utilizing the plants and the animals and the nature in their area, their rivers, for these cultures and traditions. In the Cerrado, there's a lot of other traditional people groups and communities. There's the quilombolas, there's the veredeiros, which are people groups that lives in the veredas, which are areas in the Cerrado that are flooded with water. And there's a palm tree called buriti that grows in the area, and so they have this understanding of living with the palm trees and in these areas. There's the Fecho de Pasto, which is a community that lives in Bahia that leaves their cattle loose to graze on native grasses of the Cerrado. So rather than deforesting and destroying the native vegetation to then plant an invasive species called brachiaria, which is the typical way of cattle raising here in Brazil. They'll leave their cattle to go and graze on the native plants of the Cerrado. There's also the Cocobabaçu Breakers, Quebradeiras do Cocobabaçu. This is a community that lives in the northeast in Maranhão that are very strong women that for a living they're breaking this very hard shell of Cocobabaçu. in order to produce soap and oil and flour using this type of coconut that is found here in Brazil, or in the Cerrado. Other communities also include ribeirinhos, which are communities that live alongside the beira do rio, live alongside the rivers, and so they have the practices of cultivating their food along the side of the river, where it's more humid, there's more nutrients for them to have a native bee that really is enjoying me right now. So the river communities are plant along the side of rivers where it's more humid, there's more nutrients because the river brings organic matter from upstream, and then when the river goes down in the dry season along the side of the river, it's very nutritious and good for planting the food of the riverside communities. And then there are also so going back to the Quilombola communities is an important community here in Brazil of people that were formerly slaves, and then they escaped to find freedom, to find liberty here in Brazil. And so they escaped their slaveholders and then formed communities in nature, specifically in the Cerrado in this case. And so for generations have continued their traditions and practices using the nature in Cerrado for their forms of life. And so the Cerrado is under threat. Through deforestation, through fires, through hunting, through pollution of these waterways. We have this important role to protect the Cerrado. Through the deforestation of the Cerrado, this affects the water supply, the water security of Brazil, because the native vegetation helps the water infiltrate and go down into the aquifers to go be stored underground. It also slows down the erosion because the native plants are holding the soil well. Also, it breaks the force of the rain as it hits the trees as it comes down. Typically in the Cerrado, when it rains, it's going to be a very strong rain, and so there's a lot of force. But when we deforest, the plants that are being planted for agriculture have very small roots, and also they're not always present. And so this will cause the rain to have a lot of, when the rain falls with a lot of force, it will compact the soil, and then the roots and the plants aren't going to be absorbing the water that comes down. And so the water will then run off and go into the streams quickly, and then this can cause to more flooding and will lead to the water leaving the Cerrado more quickly. Rather than with the native plants, the water will be stored in these aquifers, and then throughout the year will be slowly released through these creeks and through these rivers to other parts of Brazil. And so as we deforest the Cerrado, this will affect the water supply for other parts of Brazil. And beyond this, deforestation will affect the biodiversity, will cause the plants and the animals to be at risk of extinction or be threatened because they're being killed and not giving the opportunity to recover and be restored in their native ways. And so we have this important important role to protect the Cerrado, to protect the rivers and streams that not only affect the communities here in Brasilia or here in the Cerrado, but will also affect the communities in other parts of Brazil. We're also it's important to protect the trees and the animals. One, because of their own intrinsic value that they have, the biodiversity, the role that each tree and each tree species, each species of grass and animals, the role that they play in the ecosystem. And then they also are important for storing carbon. As I mentioned earlier, the root system of the trees in the Cerrado store a lot of carbon as they continue to grow underground. And so by us protecting the Cerrado, we get to help protect the water supply, the water security here in Brazil for us, as well as people in other communities. We get to protect the biodiversity and the intrinsic value that the plants and species have here in the Cerrado. We also get to help with the carbon storage and the role that that plays in climate change. And so this exposition has been highlighting these topics for school kids and for the general public, for us to be able to highlight the importance of the biome itself, of the Cerrado, that Brazil is not just the Amazon, it is also the Cerrado. But then also we get to highlight the traditional people groups and communities that have lived here for generations, that have lived in sustainable ways that we have so much to learn from, that we can implement into our own lives, but also so that as we make those changes, we also secure their ways of living and their traditions and their forms of life. So thank you so much for listening and being a part of this exposition with us. You can follow us on Instagram with Instituto Arvoredo, and it'd be a pleasure to meet with you and talk more about the Cerrado and the work that we are doing here with Instituto Arvoredo. So thank you.